Spleen is one of the secondary lymphoid organ. It is located in the left hypochondrium. It may also extend into the epigastric region. Okay. Now, if you see spleen, the spleen is related against three ribs: the 9th, 10th, and the 11th rib. You can consider these three fingers as three ribs: the 9th, 10th, and the 11th rib. And we can see the spleen is present along the long axis of the 10th rib. Okay, spleen is present along the long axis of the 10th rib. That is about the location of the spleen. If you see the dimension of the spleen, you can see the thickness of the spleen from these two areas. Okay, if you consider the thickness of the spleen, it is around 1 inch thick. Okay, if you see the breadth, this is the breadth of the spleen. The breadth of the spleen is almost 3 inches. If you see the length of the spleen, this is the length of the spleen, okay, between the anterior and the posterior. And if you see the length of the spleen, that is almost 5 inches. If you see the weight of the spleen, it is approximately 7 ounces in weight. 7 ounce in weight. Then if you see the location, it is located between, it is related to 9th, 10th and the 11th rib. So 9th to 11th rib. If you see, all these numbers are coming in odd, like 1 inch thick, 3 inch broad, 5 inch long, 7 ounce weight, 9th to 11th rib. So it is between 1 to 9. All the odd numbers 1 to 9. So this relation to the odd numbers can be called as Harris dictum. Okay, Harris dictum. Coming to the external features of spleen. The spleen has got two ends, an anterior end, see, which is broad. So this much is the anterior end. Okay, this whole thing is the anterior end. So this is anterior end which is broad, and we have a posterior end which is narrow. This can be otherwise called as, see, always the spleen is located like this. Okay, this end, the posterior end is coming more medially and the anterior end is coming more laterally. So it can be called as the medial end and the lateral end also. So the medial end is more narrow and the anterior end, the lateral end is more broad. The lateral end is more broad, the medial end is more narrow. Okay, so this is the position. Okay, with three ribs in place. Next, coming to the borders. Okay, so there are two prominent borders, one on the superior aspect, other one on the inferior aspect. Okay, if you see, the superior border is little sharper when compared to the inferior border, which is blunt and rounded. Okay, so we have a superior border and an inferior border. If you see superior border, the characteristic feature of superior border is these notches. Okay, there can be 2 or 3 notches which are present along the superior border, which is related to the development of this spleen. Okay, these notches are related to the development of the spleen, which is present only on the superior border. This helps to determine, to keep the spleen in anatomical position. So we can study one more additional border. Okay, other than the superior and the inferior border, we can study one more additional border which is present along the hilum, which is not very prominent, but it is present along the hilum. This border can be called as intermediate border. Okay, the hilum is nothing but the place where the structures either enter or leave the spleen. Okay, so this is the hilum of the spleen, and this can be considered as intermediate border. Okay, which is present along the medial surface, okay, which is present along the visceral surface or the medial surface of the spleen. Okay, so these are all the borders. Next, let us study about surfaces. Basically, the spleen has got two surfaces. One is the diaphragmatic surface. This is the diaphragmatic surface, which is convex and smooth. Okay, convex and smooth. And then the next surface is the visceral surface, which is present along the medial aspect. Okay, which is having many impressions. Okay, which is having many impressions. So there are two surfaces. One is the diaphragmatic surface, which is convex and smooth, and the other surface is the visceral surface, which is related to the organs. If you carefully see, this intermediate border will divide the visceral surface into an upper part and a lower part. Okay, into an upper part and a superior surface and the inferior surface. Okay, this intermediate border is dividing the medial surface or the visceral surface into a superior aspect and the inferior aspect, or superior surface and an inferior surface. Next, coming to the relations of the spleen. Okay, this can be understood well by looking at this model. Okay, and compare with the specimen. Okay, so we can see this is the spleen. Okay, this is the spleen which is present along the left hypochondriac region. You can see it is present in the left hypochondriac region. Now, what you wanted to know is the other structures which are related. You can see this is actually the diaphragm, which is separating the spleen from, you can see this is actually the lung covering the lung and the covering. That is the pleura. Okay, lung and the pleura. And you can see these yellow structures are the ribs, the 9th, 10th and the 11th rib. You can see the 3 ribs, okay, 9th, 10th and the 11th rib. So the spleen, you can see it is located along the axis of the 10th rib. Okay, so this is the position. This is how it is situated in the abdomen. Okay, and it is separated from the thoracic cavity by the diaphragm. So this is what we have to understand. Now we will compare it with the specimen. Now this is the specimen of the spleen. And this is actually the diaphragmatic surface. So this is the surface, diaphragmatic surface. So this is related mainly to the diaphragm. Okay, and it is separated from the diaphragm by means of peritoneum. Okay, the peritoneum is lining the surface. The peritoneum is lining the surface. It is separating it from the diaphragm. This green structure is the diaphragm. Now this diaphragm separates the spleen from that of the lung and the pleura. Okay, from that of lung and the pleura along the superior aspect, only along the superior aspect. Okay, lung and the pleura along the superior aspect, mainly the lung along the superior aspect and pleura which will be extending up to the inferior aspect. Okay, so lung will be extending only till here, then the pleura will be extending till the end. Okay, now, so beyond these two structures, that is the diaphragm and the lung and the pleura, we have the 3 ribs which are related, the 9th, 10th and the 11th rib. This is about the relation of the diaphragmatic surface. Next we will see the visceral relation. Okay, to understand the visceral relation, we need to know these surfaces, the superior surface and the inferior surface, which are separated by this intermediate border. And this anterior end is broad, and this area is another small area which is present along the anterior border. Okay, just medial to the anterior border. Okay, so these are the 3 areas. Now we have 3 areas: superior, inferior, and along the anterior end we have a small area. Okay, so these 3 areas are related to 3 important organs. The superior surface, the superior part of the visceral surface is mainly related to the stomach. So this area is related to the stomach. Okay, so if you see this model, you can see this is the superior surface. This is the superior surface which is related to the fundus of the stomach. You can see this is the stomach and this is the fundus of the stomach. So superior surface is mainly related to fundus of stomach. You can see, if you remove, so this is actually the superior surface. This is how it is placed. Okay, this is related to the fundus of the stomach. Okay, next going to the inferior surface. The inferior surface, if you see the inferior surface, it is mainly related to the left kidney. You can see this is actually the left kidney. You can see the inferior surface is mainly related to the left kidney. Okay, this area. Now coming to the anterior end, so the broad anterior end, this is the anterior end. So this area along the medial aspect of the anterior end is related to the splenic flexure of colon. Okay, to the splenic flexure of colon. You can see this anterior end, this area is related to this area. Okay, this area is related to the splenic flexure of colon. So these are all the relations along this surface. And this hilum, okay, this hilum is related to the tail of the pancreas. Okay, related to the tail of the pancreas. So this is the pancreas, this is the tail of the pancreas, which is related to the hilum of the spleen, which is related to this area, the hilum of the spleen. Okay, along a ligament, the leno-renal ligament. So the tail of the pancreas present inside the leno-renal ligament, and it is related to the hilum of the spleen. So these are all the visceral relations of the spleen.